The red dust of Copper Bend settled on everything. A fine, rust-colored powder that clung to good intentions and bad deeds alike. It coated the brim of Eliza Hart's black hat, settled in the creases of her Boston wool dress, and tasted of grit and finality on her tongue. From her seat on the hard wooden bench, she could see the Superstition Mountains through the courthouse's open doorway, a hazy blue-gray spine against the unforgiving sky. The world outside felt vast and indifferent. Inside this makeshift hall of justice, it had shrunk to the space between heartbeats, each one hammered out by the distant, rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's forge. Eliza kept her eyes fixed on her brother, Henry. At 19, he was all sharp angles and defiant fear, his wrists bound in front of him. He sat beside Sheriff Amos Pike, a man whose face was a roadmap of compromises made under the Arizona sun. Henry was accused of killing 2 men, 2 of Silas Drager's men. The word in town, the word that mattered, was that Henry was a murderer. The truth that he had been defending their small ranch from armed trespassers was as substantial as a puff of smoke in the wind. The only thing that mattered was that Silas Drager, owner of the Black Crown mine and most of the territory besides, wanted someone to pay. Drager himself sat opposite them, a monument of tailored broadcloth and silvered hair. He did not look at Eliza or Henry. He looked at the circuit judge, a man who owed his position to Drager's influence, and spoke with the calm certainty of a man arranging freight. "He says Henry must hang," the words echoed in Eliza's mind. Drager had said them not with anger, but with the flat tone of a business transaction. An eye for an eye, his men for her brother. Sheriff Pike shifted, the leather of his gun belt groaning in protest. He had a way of observing a room that made a person feel he was weighing souls. He knew Henry was a good boy, impulsive but not malicious. He also knew that Drager's power was a current too strong to swim against. Justice in Copper Bend was whatever Silas Drager said it was. The judge cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound. He looked at Henry, then at Drager, his gaze finally skittering away to a crack in the floorboards. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Eliza's stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. She had come west from Boston after her parents' death in a supposed Apache raid, believing in the promise of a new start. All she had found was a harder, faster way to lose everything she had left. Drager rose slowly, his presence filling the small room. "However," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the stifling heat, "I am not an unreasonable man. A tragedy has occurred. Perhaps another tragedy can be averted." He turned his gaze on Eliza for the first time. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, cold and assessing. He saw not a grieving sister, but a piece on a game board. "Your brother's life has been forfeit, Miss Hart, but I am prepared to offer a trade." A low murmur went through the handful of spectators. Eliza could feel their stares, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "What kind of trade?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Drager's lips curved into something that was not a smile. He gestured toward the back of the room. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, his frame lean and powerful beneath a simple cotton shirt. His black hair was long, tied back with a leather cord. A pale, jagged scar ran from his temple down his cheek, pulling at the corner of one eye. He moved with a silent grace that was unnerving, his dark eyes missing nothing. He stopped a few feet behind Drager, a living shadow. "This is Cole Redhawk," Drager announced. "He works for me, a tracker, a horsebreaker, a man of many, shall we say, practical skills. He is also a man without a wife." The meaning landed with the force of a physical blow. The room fell silent. The only sound, the frantic beat of Eliza's own heart. The townspeople knew Cole Redhawk. He was the half-Apache scout who had once ridden with the cavalry, now a ghost who lived on the edge of town, breaking the wildest horses and speaking to almost no one. A man caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. To the people of Copper Bend, he was a savage, a necessary tool for a man like Drager, but not a man one invited into their home. Certainly not one a respectable woman from the East would marry. Marry him, Draeger said, his voice smooth as polished stone. Marry him, and I will personally attest to the court that your brother acted in self-defense. The charges will be dropped. Henry will walk free. Eliza stared, speechless. This was not justice. It was a grotesque display of power. She looked from Draeger's cold face to the silent man standing behind him. Cole Redhawk's expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over her head. Was he a party to this, a participant in her humiliation? Draeger was not just offering a deal. He was forging a chain. By binding this man, this living weapon, to a wife, to a family, he was binding him more tightly to himself. It was a clever, cruel move, designed to control his asset and divide the town with the scandal of such a marriage. Her first instinct was to scream her refusal, to choose the gallows for Henry over such a violation. But then she looked at her brother's pale, terrified face. He was all she had. The ranch, the memory of their parents, the future she had dreamed of, it all depended on him living. The judge, seeing his opportunity to abdicate responsibility, spoke up. Miss Hart, this is a most unconventional offer. The court would need your consent. The air grew thick with unspoken prejudice. The thought of it, a white woman from a good family given to a man like that, was a delicious scandal. It was an insult, a public branding. Eliza stood, her legs trembling. She needed a moment, a breath of air that was not choked with dust and deceit. "May I have a moment outside, Your Honor?" she asked. The judge nodded, relieved. "Of course. My dear, take a moment." She walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding glare of the afternoon. The blacksmith's hammer fell, a lonely, angry sound. The town's windmill, which supplied the public trough, squeaked on its axle. A constant, grating complaint. It sounded like the law itself, rusted and failing. She leaned against the rough wood of the building, her mind racing. She could hear voices from the alley beside the courthouse, Draeger's low rumble, and another man's nervous tone. "Are you sure about this, Silas?" the other man asked. "The raid on the Hart place last year, folks still talk. What if she puts two and two together?" Draeger's voice was sharp. "The raid was blamed on the Apache. That is the official story. I paid good money to make it so. That land has the only reliable spring in this valley. And I will have it. This marriage is simply another tool to secure my interests. Red Hawk will be tied to the girl, and the girl will be tied to me." Eliza froze, pressing herself flat against the wall. A raid, paid for, just like the one that had killed her parents, all for water. The blood drained from her face. It was not just about Henry anymore. This was about a lie that had destroyed her family, a crime covered in the red dust of this territory. A shadow fell over her. She spun around to see Sheriff Pike standing there, his expression grim. He held out a tin cup of water from his canteen. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said quietly. She took the water, her hands shaking. "I just heard—" The sheriff held up a hand. "Best not to say what you heard in a town where the walls have ears. Miss Hart, Draeger owns the walls and the ears, too." He looked back toward the courthouse door. "What he's offering in there is a life sentence of a different kind. You say no, and your brother hangs. You say yes, and you chain yourself to a man the whole town fears and a life you cannot imagine." "Is there no other way?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Is there no justice?" Pike looked away, toward the distant, hazy mountains. "Justice is a long road out here," he said. "Sometimes it takes a detour. There might be another way, a different path, but you will not like it. It is a gamble." "What is it?" she pressed, desperation making her bold. He met her gaze, his eyes full of a weary pragmatism. "Draeger wants to own Cole Redhawk. He thinks a wife will be his cage, but a cage has a door. Redhawk is more than Draeger thinks he is. You want to save your brother. You want to find out what really happened to your folks. You might need a man who can read the truth in a hoofprint and survive where other men die." His words hung in the air, a dangerous and radical idea. "Do not give him an answer today," the sheriff advised, his voice barely a whisper. "You tell the judge you need time. Tell them you're a woman of sense, not a filly to be traded sight unseen. Tell them you demand 3 days. 3 days to go to Black Crown and meet the man they expect you to marry." "Why?" Eliza asked, confused. "What good will 3 days do?" Pike gave a small, grim smile. "A lot can happen in 3 days. You might find out if the devil you're being sold is the one you should truly be afraid of. Go on now. Play the part." Eliza took a deep breath, the dusty air searing her lungs. Fear was a cold stone in her gut, but beneath it, a tiny, hard flame of anger had been lit. Draeger had not just threatened her future. He was responsible for her past. This was no longer just about saving Henry. It was about uncovering a truth that had been deliberately buried. She walked back into the courthouse, her steps measured and sure. The room fell silent as she faced the judge, her chin held high. All eyes were on her. Draeger watched her with an amused, confident expression, certain he had won. Cole Redhawk had not moved, a stoic statue in the shadows. "Your Honor," Eliza said, her voice clear and carrying through the room, "Mr. Draeger's offer is substantial. I am a practical woman, not a foolish girl ruled by sentiment. I will not be traded like livestock." A flicker of surprise crossed Draeger's face. "Before I give my answer," she continued, locking eyes with the mining baron, "I require 3 days. I will travel to the Black Crown mine. I wish to speak with Mr. Redhawk, to understand the man I am being asked to bind my life to. At the end of those 3 days, I will give you my decision." The judge looked at Draeger, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The request was reasonable. To deny it would make him look like a tyrant. He was confident that 3 days of exposure to a half-savage horsebreaker would only make his offer seem more merciful in the end. "Very well," the judge declared. "The prisoner will remain in the sheriff's custody. A decision will be rendered in 3 days' time." Eliza walked toward the door, not daring to look at Henry. She could feel Cole Redhawk's eyes on her back as she stepped out into the sun. The bargain had been struck, not with a word, but with a stay of execution. She had 3 days, 3 days to walk into the wolf's den, not knowing if she was the bait, the sacrifice, or something else entirely. As she began the long, dusty walk toward the livery to arrange her passage to Black Crown, she knew only one thing for certain. The life she had known was over. A new one, born of desperation and a thirst for justice, was about to begin. The Black Crown mine was a scar upon the land, a sprawling wound of headframes, slag heaps, and crude buildings that clawed at the base of the mountains. A perpetual haze of smoke and dust hung over it, a man-made cloud that blotted out the clean desert sky. The buggy Eliza had hired from town dropped her at the entrance to the main compound, the driver eager to be gone before sunset. A woman with a face like a dried apple and eyes as dark and knowing as a starless night met her at the porch of the main house. Her hair was a neat, silver coronet, and she wore a simple black dress, her only adornment a small silver cross. "You are Miss Hart," she said. It was a statement, not a question. Her voice was low and carried a faint accent, a soft rolling of the consonants. "I am Doña Marisol. Mr. Draeger is away, but he instructed me to make you comfortable." Comfort was the last thing Eliza felt. She felt like a lamb being led into an abattoir. However, she nodded politely. "Thank you, Doña Marisol." The house was opulent in a vulgar, heavy way, with dark wood, thick carpets, and the mounted heads of animals staring down from the walls. It smelled of cigar smoke and polish. Doña Marisol led her to a guest room that was finer than any she had stayed in since leaving Boston, but it felt like a cage, the windows looking out onto the grim machinery of the mine. "You are here to see the man, Cole Redhawk," Doña Marisol said, her expression unreadable as she placed a pitcher of water on the washstand. "Yes," Eliza replied. "I am to consider a proposal." The older woman's lips thinned. "Some proposals are chains," she said softly. You will find him in the corrals. He is with the white stallion. Come." Eliza followed her back out into the harsh sunlight. The corrals were set away from the main operations, a series of large pens where dozens of horses milled about. In the largest, a man and a horse moved as one. The horse was a magnificent creature, pure white, with a wild intelligence in its eyes. The man was Cole Redhawk. He wore no hat, and the sun illuminated the sharp planes of his face, the stark line of the scar. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, circling the stallion, his shoulders relaxed, his hands loose at his sides. He was not breaking the horse. He was communicating with it. He spoke in a low, melodious language that Eliza did not recognize, a series of soft clicks and gentle murmurs. The great white horse, Ghost, watched him, its ears twitching, responding to his voice, to the subtle shift of his weight. There was no rope, no whip, only a profound and silent understanding. When he finally noticed them standing by the fence, he did not startle. He simply brought his attention to them slowly, his dark eyes taking in Eliza with a calm, unnerving intensity. He gave a slight nod to Doña Marisol, then looked back at Eliza. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of slate and a nub of chalk. He wrote 2 words and held it up for her to see. "Welcome, miss." His silence was more intimidating than any shout. It was a wall, thick and deliberate. Why would a man who could command a wild animal with his voice refuse to speak to a person? Doña Marisol led her away a few moments later. "He does not speak the English tongue much," she explained, though she did not look at Eliza as she spoke. "He says it tastes like ash in his mouth. He uses it only when he must." That evening, Doña Marisol showed Eliza to Cole's quarters, a small, detached bunkhouse not far from the corrals. The door was unlocked. "It is best you see," the housekeeper said simply. "A man's room tells his truest story." The room was Spartan, but clean. A simple bed, a small table, a single chair, but the objects within it told a story of a man torn in two. On the table, a well-thumbed volume of Shakespeare's tragedies lay next to a worn, leather-bound manual on tracking and trapping. A beautifully carved wooden flute rested on the windowsill. From a peg on the wall hung a beaded pouch of Apache design and a weathered hunting knife in a plain sheath, its handle worn smooth by use. It was a tool, not an ornament. Propped against the wall was a small writing desk. On it, a journal lay open. Eliza averted her eyes, feeling like an intruder, but not before she saw the script. It was a precise, elegant hand, the letters perfectly formed, a stark contrast to the rough, unlettered savage Draeger had presented in the courthouse. Doña Marisol saw her looking. "He works for Mr. Draeger because he must. It is a matter of survival, a debt from a long time ago. It is not loyalty. Do not mistake the leash for love of the master." The housekeeper's words planted a seed of understanding. Cole Redhawk was a prisoner here, just as Henry was a prisoner in town. They were both pawns in Draeger's game. The second day passed in a haze of heat and observation. Eliza watched Cole work with the horses, his patience seemingly endless. She saw the other men at the mine give him a wide berth, a mixture of fear and contempt in their eyes. He ate his meals alone, brought to him by Doña Marisol, and spent his evenings sitting outside his bunkhouse, sometimes playing a haunting, lonely melody on his flute that seemed to be the voice of the desert itself. He never approached her, but she often felt his eyes on her. It was not a threatening gaze, but a watchful, assessing one. He was studying her, just as she was studying him. That night, unable to sleep, Eliza felt an irresistible pull to return to his room. She told herself it was to better understand the man she might have to marry, but a deeper instinct was at work. She was searching for a weapon, for some piece of knowledge she could use against Draeger. The room was empty, the faint, clean scent of sage hanging in the air. The journal was on the desk, closed this time, but beside it was a loose sheet of paper, a page that had been carefully removed. It was covered in that same neat script. She knew she should not, that it was a profound violation of his privacy, but her brother's life was on the line. She picked it up. It was not a diary entry. It was a copy of a letter, transcribed in Cole's hand. The words leaped off the page, cold and damning. The letter was addressed to a captain at Fort Lowell. It spoke of a shipment of gold, a gratuity for services rendered. It mentioned a specific date and a location, a box canyon with a spring. It instructed the captain to ensure his patrols were conveniently absent from that area on that night, as a band of Apache renegades were expected to be active. It was signed, in a confident flourish that Cole had copied perfectly, Silas Drager. Eliza's blood ran cold. The date, the location. It matched the night her parents were killed. It was not a raid, it was a massacre, orchestrated by Drager to seize their land, their water, and he had paid the United States Army to look the other way. She felt a wave of nausea and stumbled back, the paper trembling in her hand. Cole had been investigating. He had been collecting proof. This was not the journal of a simple horsebreaker. It was the ledger of a spy. A floorboard creaked behind her. She whirled around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Cole Redhawk stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the moonlit desert. He had moved so silently she had not heard him approach. His face was a mask of shadows, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze on her, on the paper in her hand. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the wind whispering around the corners of the small building. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He did not look angry. He looked tired, a profound weariness in his eyes. He finally broke the silence, and when he spoke, his voice was a low, rough rasp, as if dragged over stones. It was the first time she had heard him speak English. "You should refuse," he said. The words were simple, direct, and held no trace of the soft melody he used with his horses. This was the language that tasted of ash. Eliza clutched the paper. "Refuse after reading this. This is proof of what he did to my family. His life would be burned beside me." He took a step closer. "Drager is not a man who makes bargains. He builds cages. He wants you as another bar in mine. If you marry me, you become a target. You will not have a moment of peace. The hatred this town has for me will be yours as well. Your life will be forfeit." She looked at him, truly looked at him, past the scar, past the silence, and saw the truth of Sheriff Pike's words. This man was not the devil. He was the one fighting him from the inside. He was offering her an escape, a chance to save herself from the fate he was trapped in. He was trying to protect her. For 2 days, she had seen him as a puzzle, a threat, a potential ally. Now, she saw a man of honor, burdened by a history she could not comprehend, who was willing to warn away the woman being forced upon him. She straightened her shoulders, a new, fierce resolve hardening within her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer in control. "The decision is mine," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "And it is the truth's. This paper changes everything." His dark eyes searched her face. Looking for something, he seemed to find it. "Drager thinks he is chaining a wolf," Eliza continued, her voice gaining strength. "He thinks a wife will make you tame. He is wrong. He is not getting a tame wolf. He is getting two." Cole stood perfectly still, watching her. The air in the small room was electric, charged with the weight of her words. "I will accept his proposal," she said, the plan forming in her mind, audacious and terrifying. "I will marry you. We will give him the show he wants, and while he is busy celebrating his cleverness, we will gather the rest of the proof we need. We will use his own cage against him. We will find justice for my brother and for my parents." It was a declaration of war, made in a dusty bunkhouse in the heart of her enemy's territory. She was proposing an alliance, a partnership forged in the fires of shared grief and a common foe. She was offering her life, not as a sacrifice, but as a sword. She held out her hand, the copied letter resting on her palm, a fragile testament to a terrible crime. It was a treaty, offered between two people who had every reason to distrust each other. He looked down at the paper, then back up at her face. For a long time, he said nothing. The lonely sound of his flute seemed a distant memory. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out and his fingers brushed hers as he took the page. It was not a gesture of acceptance. Not yet. It was a beginning, a silent acknowledgement that, in this desolate corner of the world, they were no longer alone. The wedding day dawned with a sky the color of a fresh bruise. There was no music in the small adobe church in Copper Bend, only the sound of a dry wind rattling the shutters and the shuffle of boots on the wooden floor. Eliza stood at the altar in the same dark wool dress she had worn to court, a small, hastily gathered bouquet of desert wildflowers clutched in her hands. The petals were already starting to curl and brown at the edges, a fragile beauty surrendering to the oppressive heat. The pews were a stark illustration of the town's divided soul. On one side sat the white citizens of Copper Bend, the women in their Sunday best, their face tight with disapproval, their whispers like the rustle of snakes in dry grass. They looked at Eliza with a mixture of pity and contempt, a fallen woman making a devil's bargain. On the other side, silent and still as carved figures, sat a dozen families from the Mexican quarter and a few Apache who had come in from the fringes of the territory. They did not whisper. Their dark, watchful eyes held a different kind of judgment, a shared understanding of survival and the hard choices it required. Cole stood beside her, looking not at the minister, but at the open Bible on the lectern. The page was turned to a passage about justice and mercy, a bitter irony that was not lost on Eliza. He was clean-shaven, his long black hair tied back neatly, and he wore a clean, dark shirt. He seemed a pillar of calm in a sea of hostility. The minister, a young man with a perpetually nervous expression, rushed through the ceremony, his words stumbling over each other as if he were eager to be done with the whole sordid affair. When it came time for the vows, he looked at Cole, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Cole turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting Eliza's for a brief, intense moment. Then, in a low, clear voice, he spoke a single word in the soft, flowing language of the Chiricahua. The sound was alien in the consecrated space, a piece of the wild desert brought inside the church walls. It was an act of defiance, a claiming of his own identity in a ceremony designed to strip it from him. He then looked back at the minister and said, in English that was crisp and resolute, "I do." The minister, flustered, turned to Eliza. "Do you take this man?" She looked out at the hostile faces, at Sheriff Amos Pike standing by the back door, his expression unreadable, his hand resting near his pistol. She saw Doña Marisol sitting in the front row of the Mexican side, her face a stoic mask. Henry was not there. His absence was a sharp, painful void, a testament to his shame and her sacrifice. She was utterly alone. Except for the man standing beside her, the stranger who was now her ally. "I do," she said, her voice a near whisper, but unwavering. As they turned to leave, a pariah and his bride, Doña Marisol stepped into the aisle. She pressed a small, heavy package wrapped in oilcloth into Eliza's hand, her fingers warm and firm. Her eyes conveyed a message of solidarity that needed no words. Eliza slipped the package into her pocket just as the whispers from the other side of the aisle grew louder, a wave of venomous speculation following them out into the unforgiving sunlight. The ride back to the Hart Ranch was silent. It was no longer the Hart Ranch. Eliza realized it was the Hart Red Hawk Ranch now. The name felt strange and clumsy on her tongue. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath. The fire had taken the barn and scorched the side of the main house, leaving ugly black scars on the clapboard. The air still smelled of char and loss. They did not go inside at first. Cole dismounted and walked the perimeter of the burned area, his eyes on the ground. He moved with a focused intensity, reading the scorched earth like a book. Eliza watched him, fascinated. He was not just looking, he was seeing. He knelt, touching the ash, examining the pattern of the burn on a fallen fence post. After a long while, he came back to where she stood by the horses. "It was not an accident," he said, his voice low, "and it was not a raid. There were 3 of them. They used oil. They started the fires in 4 different places at once, to make it spread fast. They wanted to burn you out, make the place worthless so you would have to sell to him." His words confirmed her darkest suspicions. It was all part of Draeger's plan. A slow, calculated siege to get his hands on their water. Her parents' death, Henry's arrest, this forced marriage, the fire. It was all one single monstrous crime. Inside the house, a fine layer of soot covered everything. Eliza ran a hand over her mother's rocking chair, leaving a clean streak in the grime. This was what she was fighting for, this land, this house, this memory. Cole laid a fire in the hearth while she unwrapped Doña Marisol's package. Inside was a small, leather-bound ledger, a cash book. A single page was marked. It was a record of payments, written in a coded shorthand, but the names and dates were clear enough. Payments to men for security, for route clearing, for discouraging squatters. The dates corresponded with attacks on other small ranches in the area, ranches that had since been bought for pennies on the dollar by the Black Crown Mine. It was another piece of the puzzle, a record of Draeger's methodical campaign of terror. "We have to protect this," Eliza said, holding up the ledger and the transcribed letter she had taken from Cole's room. "If he finds out we have these, he will kill us without a second thought." Cole nodded, his face grim in the flickering firelight. "We make copies. We hide them." They spent the next hour at the small writing desk in her father's study, painstakingly copying every word from the letter and the ledger page. The work was slow, their hands cramping, but a sense of shared purpose filled the quiet room. They were no longer 2 strangers forced together. They were conspirators, partners in a dangerous secret. When they were done, they had 3 identical sets of the damning evidence. "One we keep here," Cole said, gesturing around the house. "Hidden, but not too well. If they come looking, they need to find something to make them stop looking. A decoy." He took one set of the papers, rolled them tightly, and slid them deep inside a hollowed-out book on the bookshelf, a dry volume on crop rotation. "The second set," he continued, "goes outside, where the land can keep it." He led her out into the twilight, to a massive ancient cottonwood tree that stood by the creek. Its roots were thick and gnarled, like the knuckles of a giant hand. With his knife, he carefully pried up a section of bark near the base, revealing a deep, dry hollow within the trunk. He placed the second roll of papers inside and replaced the bark. The seam was nearly invisible. "And the third," he said, walking toward the stables where his horse, Ghost, was kept. "This one travels." He went to his saddle, which was slung over a rail. He worked at the underside of the cantle, his fingers sure and practiced. A small section of the leather peeled back, revealing a cleverly hidden compartment, barely large enough for the folded papers. He secured them inside and smoothed the leather back down. It was a perfect hiding place, a secret that could move. "Now we need to get a message out," Eliza said, her mind racing. "The sheriff is compromised. We cannot trust anyone in Copper Bend." Cole looked toward the mountains, a dark silhouette against the fading light. "There is a captain at Fort Bowie. Bennett, Nora Bennett. She is a good soldier. Honest. She does not trust Draeger. How do we reach her? It is more than a day's ride." "A boy," Cole said. "Swiftfoot. He is young, but he runs like the wind and knows the hidden trails. He can be trusted. I will find him tomorrow." A plan. They had a plan. For the first time in weeks. Eliza felt a sliver of hope cut through the despair. It was a fragile, dangerous hope, but it was real. They were fighting back. As darkness fell, A new kind of tension settled over the house. They were husband and wife. The law said so, but they were strangers, bound by a plot for justice, not by affection. They ate a simple meal of bread and dried meat in near silence, the unspoken questions hanging in the air between them. Later, as they were cleaning up, they heard it, the sound of hoofbeats. Not one horse, but several, approaching at a walk, not a gallop. It was not a friendly visit. Cole moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "Drager's men," he said, his voice flat. "4 of them." Eliza's heart leaped into her throat. So soon. "He is testing us," Cole said, turning from the window, his face a hard mask. "He is sending a message." The riders stopped in the yard. A man with a heavy mustache and a smug expression dismounted and strode to the porch, his spurs ringing on the wooden planks. He did not knock. He pounded on the door with his fist. "Hart Red Hawk Drager sent us to check on your, heard you had a fire, would not want you running out of water." The man's voice was loud, laced with mockery. The mention of water was a deliberate, pointed threat. They knew exactly why this land was valuable. They were not there to help. They were there to remind Eliza and Cole who was in charge, to let them know they were being watched. They were there to see if the fire and the forced wedding had broken them. Cole looked at Eliza, his dark eyes asking a silent question. She took a deep breath, her hand resting on the heavy iron skillet she had just washed. She nodded. They were not broken. They were ready. The war for the Hart Red Hawk Ranch had just begun. Cole did not open the door. He simply let the pounding echo in the quiet house, a hollow, thumping heartbeat. He stood in the center of the room, a silhouette against the firelight, utterly still. "Outside." The man with the mustache shouted again, his voice laced with impatience. "We know you are in there. Red Hawk, do not make us come in." Eliza held the heavy skillet, her knuckles white. Her instinct was to hide, to cower, but the sight of Cole's calm defiance gave her strength. He was not afraid, and so she would not be either. He walked to the door, not with haste, but with a deliberate, measured tread. He did not unlock it. He simply spoke, his voice not loud, but carrying with a chilling clarity that cut through the wood. "The well is fine. Our water is our business. You are trespassing. Leave now." There was a moment of stunned silence from the porch, followed by a gruff laugh. "Trespassing. This is Drager's land you are squatting on. Savage. He just lets you think you own it." "The land is in my wife's name," Cole replied, his voice flat and cold as river stone. "The law is clear. You have 1 minute before I start to see you as a threat to her safety." The words hung in the night air. A promise and a warning. There was no anger in his tone, just a statement of fact, which made it all the more menacing. There was some muttering outside, the sound of boots shifting on the porch. The man with the mustache was clearly weighing the pleasure of harassing them against the unknown reality of confronting a man like Cole Red Hawk on his own ground. In the dark, after a long, tense moment, the hoofbeats sounded again, this time moving away, back toward the mine. Eliza let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, the skillet suddenly heavy in her hand. They were gone. For now. He did not gloat or show relief. He simply turned from the door. "We mend the fences tomorrow," he said. "A strong fence is a clear warning." The days that followed fell into a new rhythm, one of hard work and quiet partnership. They rose before the sun, the cool desert air a brief respite from the coming heat, and worked until twilight. They rebuilt the burned sections of the corral, their hammers rising and falling in a steady, companionable beat. They mended the long stretches of barbed wire fence that marked the boundary of the ranch. Eliza, whose hands were more accustomed to needlepoint and piano keys, found them becoming chapped and calloused. But she did not mind. Each repaired post, each tightened wire, was an act of defiance. It was a declaration that they were here to stay. In these long hours of shared labor, the silence between them began to change. It was no longer a wall, but a space of comfortable understanding. Cole began to speak more, not in long conversations, but in short, practical sentences. He taught her the names of the desert plants, which ones could heal and which could harm. He showed her how to read the clouds, to know when a storm was gathering in the distant mountains. He was reclaiming his English words, one by one, borrowing them back from the world that had tried to silence him, and offering them to her. One evening, after a particularly long day of stretching wire under the brutal sun, they sat on the porch steps, too weary to move. The sky was a tapestry of deep purple and fading orange. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the soft whicker of Ghost, the white stallion. As the breeze rustled through his mane, a single lamp cast a warm, golden glow from the window behind them. Eliza watched Cole's hands as he rested them on his knees. They were strong, capable hands, hands that could gentle a wild horse or track a man across miles of stone, hands that had copied a letter that could bring down an empire of greed. She thought of the wedding, of the hostile crowd, of the life she had been forced into, and she thought of the man beside her, this quiet, scarred stranger who had become her unlikely protector. She turned to him, the question rising in her heart, a genuine, vulnerable curiosity. Is the first night scary? He did not look at her immediately. He watched the flickering flame of the lamp inside, his expression thoughtful. A small, sad smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that softened the harsh line of his scar. "Only until you trust me," he said, his voice a low murmur. He turned his head then, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no demand in his gaze, no expectation, only a quiet, profound sincerity. In that moment, he was not the savage of the town's imagination, nor the weapon Draeger thought he owned. He was just a man, offering a truth as simple and solid as the ground beneath their feet. Later, inside the small, quiet house, he did not approach her with haste. He lit a second lamp, his movements slow and deliberate. He took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. He did not pull her toward the bedroom. He simply stood with her in the center of the room, holding her hand, letting her feel the steady, reassuring rhythm of his breathing. He began to speak softly in his own language, the Apache words a gentle, flowing river of sound. "It is a song my mother sang," he whispered, translating for her. "It is about the stars, how they are the campfires of the ancestors, watching over us. They remind us we are never truly alone." He led her to the small bedroom, and the story of the night was not one of passion, but of quiet reverence. It was in the gentle way he traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, the way he waited for her nod before leaning in, the way he held her as if she were something precious, something to be protected, not taken. It was an exchange of trust in the deep, silent dark, a healing of wounds they had never spoken of, a promise that in this fight they stood as one, their alliance, sealed in the quiet intimacy of that night, deepened in the days that followed. Cole took her to a hidden arroyo and taught her to shoot the rifle her father had left behind. He was a patient teacher, showing her how to brace the stock against her shoulder, how to control her breathing, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. Her first shots were wild, kicking up dust far from the tin can he had set on a rock. But gradually, her aim improved. The loud crack of the rifle no longer made her flinch. The feel of the solid wood and cool metal in her hands became a comfort. She was no longer helpless. In the evenings, by the light of the oil lamp, they would pore over her father's journals. He had been a meticulous record keeper, an amateur journalist chronicling the life of the territory. They found what they were looking for, entries detailing Apache raids on neighboring ranches. Raids that always seemed to happen just before the rancher was forced to sell his land to a holding company associated with the Black Crown mine. Her father had noted the inconsistencies. The attackers used rifles, not bows, and their tracks were often shod, not the soft moccasins of the Apache. One night, Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She pointed to an entry. "My father wrote this a week before he was killed," she whispered. He wrote, "I believe someone is creating a fiction of fear to drive us from our land. The true savage is not the one who lives in the mountains, but the one who sits in an office counting his gold." Cole placed his hand over hers on the open page. "Your father was a brave man," he said softly. "He was looking for the truth. We will finish his work." The truth felt closer than ever, but so did the danger. One afternoon, the sky turned a sickly, yellowish-brown. The wind, which had been a constant, gentle whisper, began to howl, picking up dust and grit, a sandstorm. It descended on them with a terrifying suddenness, a solid wall of roaring, blinding dust. Cole yelled for her to help him get the animals into the half-repaired barn. They fought against the wind, which tore at their clothes and stung their eyes. They managed to get the horses and a few cattle inside just as the full fury of the storm hit. The world outside the barn doors disappeared into a maelstrom of brown chaos. The wind shrieked like a banshee, and the barn itself groaned and shuddered, threatening to come apart. They were trapped, unable to see more than a few feet in front of them, the air thick with suffocating dust. They huddled together in the relative shelter of a horse stall, Ghost stamping his feet nervously beside them. In the roaring darkness, they were completely reliant on each other, when a loose section of the roof was torn away with a terrifying crash, sending a shower of debris down. Cole threw himself over Eliza, shielding her with his own body. They stayed that way for what felt like hours, two small figures against the immense, impersonal rage of the desert, until the wind finally began to lose its fury. When the storm passed, leaving a world blanketed in a fresh layer of red dust, they emerged, exhausted and filthy, but unharmed. They had survived, together. The next morning, as Cole was checking the perimeter fence for damage from the storm, he found it, a small piece of paper, folded and tucked into the twist of a repaired wire. It was not there the day before. He brought it to Eliza. The handwriting was familiar, the script of a man used to writing official reports. It was from Sheriff Pike. The message was only a few words, stark and terrifying against the white paper. 2 more nights, they will come for blood. Eliza looked from the note to Cole, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The brief peace they had found was shattered. The storm of nature was over. The storm of man was coming. The 2 days passed under a sky of hammered steel. There was no real sleep, only a state of heightened awareness, a waiting that stretched every nerve taut. They ate, they worked, they watched the horizon, and they listened to the silence of the desert, knowing it was a lie. The attack did not come with the moon, but in the deepest dark before the dawn, a time when the world holds its breath and spirits are at their lowest ebb. It began not with a sound, but with a scent on the wind, the faint, greasy smell of lamp oil, carried from 3 directions at once. Then came the shouts, a chorus of shrill, ugly cries meant to imitate the Apache war cry. But they were a clumsy, brutish parody, full of hate but empty of true warrior spirit. Almost immediately, the night bloomed with orange light. 3 great blossoms of fire erupted on the edges of the property, a carefully placed triangle of destruction designed to drive them toward the center, to trap them in a closing fist of flame. Cole was already gone. He had slipped away into the darkness an hour earlier, a silent ghost on a silent horse, on his way to a rendezvous with Captain Bennett. He had left the defense of the ranch in her hands. Eliza stood on the porch, her father's rifle in her hands, the stock cool and solid against her cheek. For a heartbeat, the girl from Boston, the one who had fainted at the sight of a mouse, screamed inside her. Then the scream died, and the woman who had survived the fire and the sandstorm took its place. They are not warriors, she thought, her mind suddenly, icily clear. They are thugs in costumes. From the shadows of the partially rebuilt barn, figures emerged, not attackers, but allies. 2 older vaqueros from a neighboring Mexican ranch, their faces grim under the brims of their wide sombreros, rifles held ready. Cole had sent Swiftfoot with a warning, and they had come. The boy himself, Swiftfoot, materialized beside her, a bow in his hand and a quiver on his back, his eyes accustomed to the dark. And then, another figure, running from the direction of the town, his face pale in the firelight. Henry. He stumbled to a halt at the bottom of the porch steps, panting, a pistol clutched in his hand. "I heard," he gasped, shame and fear warring in his eyes. "I am sorry. Eliza, I should not have left." "There is no time for sorry," she said, her voice hard, not with anger, but with the urgency of command. "Can you shoot?" He nodded, his jaw set. "Then get behind that water trough. Make every bullet count." Her voice did not tremble. She had found a strength she never knew she possessed, forged in the heat of Drager's schemes. "You two," she said to the vaqueros, pointing. "Take the west flank. The wind is coming from that direction. Use it. Do not let the fire get to the house. Swiftfoot, stay with me. You are my eyes." The attackers, emboldened by the spreading flames, began to advance. They were clumsy, moving in a loose line, firing their rifles wildly. Their goal was not a clean fight, but terror and chaos. One of them broke from the line, running toward the creek, an axe in his hand. "The water pump," Eliza realized. "He is going to break the line." She raised her rifle, braced it against the porch post, took a slow breath as Cole had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, its report shockingly loud. In the flickering firelight, she saw the man with the axe stumble and fall. She did not feel triumph, only a cold, grim necessity. One bullet, one purpose. The fight devolved into a desperate, chaotic dance against the flames. The vaqueros, masters of the land, were already at work, using wet blankets and shovels to beat back the fire on the western edge, using the headwind to slow its advance. But the other two fires were growing, a hungry, crackling wall of heat and smoke closing in. Henry, from his position behind the trough, fired with a steady, desperate accuracy, forcing two of the raiders to take cover behind a pile of rocks. The cattle, trapped in the main corral, began to panic, their bellows of terror a heartbreaking chorus. They crashed against the fences, their eyes wide and white. The attackers were using the panicked animals as a shield, moving behind them to get closer to the house. "We have to break them out," Eliza shouted over the roar of the fire, "or they will be roasted alive, and we will be trapped." She looked at the great white stallion, Ghost, who stood not in the corral with the others, but in a small, private paddock near the barn. He was not panicked. He stood alert, his head high, watching the chaos with an unnerving intelligence. An idea, wild and desperate, flashed in her mind. "Henry," she yelled, "get to the main corral gate. When I give the signal, open it, all the way." She ran from the porch, Swiftfoot at her heels. She reached the paddock, her hands fumbling with the latch. "Ghost," she said, her voice low and urgent, pressing her face against his warm neck. "Listen to me. You have to lead them out, lead them through." She swung the paddock gate open and slapped his flank hard. "Go!" The great horse needed no further urging. He burst from the paddock, a streak of white lightning against the fiery backdrop. He galloped not away from the danger, but toward it, straight to the main corral. He circled it once, his head held high, a clear, ringing whinny cutting through the din. The panicked cattle turned their heads, their terror momentarily forgotten, their herd instinct responding to the call of a clear, confident leader. "Now, Henry, now!" Eliza screamed. Henry threw the main gate open. Ghost did not hesitate. He wheeled and charged out into the open, directly toward the weakest point in the attacker's line, and behind him, a thundering, unstoppable wave of horns and hooves. The entire herd followed. It was a stampede, a living avalanche of pure, terrified animal power. The raiders who had been using the corral as cover looked up in horror. They had no time to run. The wave of cattle crashed over them, a chaotic, trampling force that shattered their line and sent them scattering in every direction. The fence went down with a splintering crash. The carefully laid siege was broken. And at that exact moment, from the north, came a new sound. Not the wild shots of the raiders, but the disciplined, rolling thunder of cavalry rifles. A bugle cut through the air, its call clean and sharp. Through the smoke, Eliza could see them. A line of blue-coated troopers on horseback, advancing at a steady trot, and at their head, riding beside Cole, was a woman with a captain's insignia on her collar, her face set and determined in the firelight. Captain Nora Bennett had arrived. The fight was over. Trapped between the ranch defenders and the cavalry, the remaining raiders threw down their weapons, their fake Apache cries dying in their throats. Troopers rounded them up, pulling the crude leather masks from their faces. They were not Apache. They were hard-faced men from the mining camps, their faces pale with fear and surprise. Captain Bennett dismounted, her boots crunching on the scorched earth. She surveyed the scene, her eyes taking in the dead raider, the captured men, the exhausted defenders. Her gaze rested on Eliza, who stood covered in soot, the heavy rifle still in her hands. "Miss Hart, I presume," Bennett said, her voice crisp and professional. "It seems you have had a busy night." Cole came to Eliza's side, his hand resting for a moment on her shoulder. A silent message of pride and relief. One of the captured men, a burly man with a broken nose, was dragged before the captain. "Who sent you?" Bennett demanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. The man spat on the ground. "Defiant! I am not saying anything." Bennett drew her sidearm with a smooth, practiced motion. "My troopers are tired," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "And this land is a long way from a judge. I'm sure we can find a sturdy tree and a short rope if you would prefer to remain silent." The man's bravado evaporated. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape that was not there. "It was Drager," he blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "Silas Drager. He paid us in gold. He said to burn them out, make it look like an Apache raid. He said no one would care, that the army would finish the job for him. He wanted the land, the water." Captain Bennett holstered her pistol, her expression grim. "I have suspected as much for a long time," she said, looking at Cole and Eliza. "Drager has been hiding behind the threat of the Apache while he wages his own private war, but I never had proof. Now," she gestured to the sullen prisoner, "I have a witness." The immediate danger was over, but the air still crackled with tension. The fires were being brought under control, but the black smoke still billowed into the dawn sky, a dark stain on the horizon. Just then, a scout rode up, his horse lathered in sweat. "Captain," he called out. "Word from town. Someone saw the troopers riding out." A message was sent to the Black Crown. "What is the situation there?" Bennett snapped. The scout's face was grave. "Drager's locked it down. Ma'am, he has a handful of his most loyal men with him. They have barricaded the entrance to the main mine shaft, and there is smoke coming from the main office. Looks like he is burning his records." Cole stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the distant mountain where the mine was located. "There is more," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," the scout said, nodding to Cole with a respect that surprised Eliza. The telegraph operator in town intercepted a message. Drager was asking about the stability of the main support pillars in shaft number 3, the one that runs right under the whole complex. He is not just burning ledgers. He has enough dynamite stored in that mine to level the entire mountain. He is going to bury everything. "We do not have time for a siege," Captain Bennett said, her words sharp and precise. "A small group, moving fast, is our only chance." There was no question of staying behind. This was Eliza's fight as much as anyone's. She, Cole, Bennett, and Swiftfoot, who knew the treacherous Badlands better than any map, mounted the freshest horses. There were no grand farewells, no time for anything but the grim understanding that they were riding toward a man who was ready to pull a mountain down on top of himself rather than face justice. The journey was a brutal trial by sand and sun. They pushed the horses mercilessly through a jagged landscape of hoodoos and canyons, a place where the earth itself seemed twisted in agony. The air was thin and hot, and the silence was broken only by the clatter of hooves on stone and their own ragged breathing. By midday, a vicious dust devil, a miniature tornado of sand and fury, swept down on them from a ridge. It was a physical assault, a whirling, blinding force that shrieked like a demon. One of the cavalry horses screamed and went down, its legs snapping in a fall. They were forced to leave it, a sacrifice to the desert's impartial cruelty. Their water was running low, the canteens feeling terrifyingly light against their backs. Thirst became a living thing, a predator stalking them through the heat. It was in a narrow, sun-baked arroyo, as they rested their trembling mounts, that a lone rider appeared on the ridge above them. He was a familiar figure, broad-shouldered and weary, silhouetted against the white-hot sky. Sheriff Amos Pike. He rode down to meet them, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I figured you would be coming the fast way," he said, his voice raspy with dust. "You are a long way from your jurisdiction." "Sheriff," Captain Bennett said, her hand resting near her pistol. Pike shook his head. Not anymore. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded document, its edges worn, bearing a heavy wax seal. "This is a federal warrant for the arrest of Silas Drager on charges of conspiracy, murder, and defrauding the United States government. I have been holding on to it for 6 months, waiting. I was playing his game, letting him think I was in his pocket, gathering the small pieces, waiting for a big one to fall. Your message from Fort Bowie was the piece I needed. Drager is a disease, and today we cut him out." His words were a splash of cold water in the desert heat. A sudden, shocking infusion of hope. He had not been a coward or a collaborator. He had been a patient man playing a long, dangerous game. He was on the side of the law, after all. Their renewed purpose carried them into the labyrinthine canyons that led to the back of the Black Crown. As they rounded a tight bend, the rock walls rising high on either side, the crack of a rifle echoed through the narrow space. A bullet ricocheted off the canyon wall with an angry whine, inches from Eliza's head. Ambush. Gunfire erupted from the rocks above. A man's face, bearded and vicious, appeared over a ledge. Eliza recognized him. Garrett, Drager's foreman and most trusted thug. Cole reacted instantly. He spurred Ghost forward, pushing Eliza's horse against the canyon wall, shielding her with his own body. A bullet tore through the flesh of his upper arm, a fiery, searing pain. He grunted, his face tightening, but he did not fall. They were pinned down, exposed in the belly of the trap. Just as Garrett and his men began to reload, a small, wizened figure emerged from a dark crevice in the rock face not 20 feet away. It was Doña Marisol, her face streaked with dust, a large, ornate iron key clutched in her hand. "This way," she hissed, her voice urgent. "Quickly! He is lighting the fuses now. There is no time." She led them into the fissure, which opened into a dark, narrow tunnel, shored up with ancient, rotting timbers. It smelled of damp earth and forgotten secrets. "This was an old ventilation shaft," she explained as they hurried through the darkness. "Sealed off for 50 years. I am the only one who remembered it. For 15 years I have watched that man, Silas Drager, poison this land. I stayed silent. I told myself it was for survival. But my silence was a sin. No more." She stopped and held out the key to Eliza. "This is for the safe in his office. He keeps everything there. The real ledgers, the map of your family's spring. Go! My sin ends today. Yours is a journey for justice." The tunnel opened into a dark, cavernous space at the heart of the mine. The air was thick with the acrid smell of nitrate from the dynamite and the bitter smoke of burning paper. In the distance, they could hear the frantic sounds of men setting the last of the charges, their voices echoing off the rock walls. Flickering oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows. turning the mine into a hellish landscape of light and darkness. The shootout began without warning, a chaotic explosion of sound and light in the enclosed space. Garrett and 2 other men were between them and the main office, using a line of ore carts as cover. Bullets splintered the wooden supports, sending showers of rock and dust raining down from the ceiling. The whole mine seemed to groan around them, the very rock protesting the violence. They were at a stalemate. Every time they tried to advance, a fresh volley of gunfire drove them back. Eliza, crouched behind a pile of discarded timbers, saw it. Next to the office door were several large sacks of brightly colored powder, cobalt blue and sulfur yellow, used for marking different grades of ore. Beside them were several barrels of thick, greasy oil for the machinery. An idea, born of desperation and the memory of her father's small print shop, flashed in her mind. Ink, thick, smoky ink, was made from lampblack and linseed oil. She pointed. "Cole, the powder, the oil. Give me cover." He did not question her. He and Pike laid down a steady, covering fire. Eliza scrambled from their hiding place, grabbing a handful of the blue powder and a rag soaked in the thick oil. She ran back to their position, her heart hammering. She wrapped the powder in the oily rag, creating a crude, makeshift bundle. "Captain," she yelled to Bennett, "when you see the smoke, move to the left." She lit a corner of the rag from a nearby lamp and threw the smoldering bundle with all her might. It landed between the ore carts, and for a second, nothing happened. Then it erupted. It did not explode, but it produced a huge, instantaneous cloud of thick, choking, brilliant blue smoke. It was denser than normal smoke, clinging to the ground, instantly obscuring everything. Under the cover of the disorienting cloud, their group moved, flanking Garrett's position. The battle became a close, brutal affair in the swirling blue haze. Captain Bennett took 1 man down, and Sheriff Pike the other. That left only Garrett. He burst from the smoke, his pistol firing wildly, and ran straight into Cole. The 2 men crashed to the ground. Garrett's pistol flew from his grasp. He scrambled up, pulling a long, wicked-looking knife. Cole rose to meet him, his own hunting knife in his hand. What followed was not a gunfight, but something older, more primal. It was a deadly dance of flashing steel in the flickering lamplight. Garrett was bigger, but Cole was faster, his movements fluid and precise. They came together in a tangle of limbs. Garrett grunted, a look of surprise on his face, and his knife clattered to the floor. Cole stood over him, the point of his own blade pressed against Garrett's throat. Garrett's eyes were wide with terror, expecting the final, fatal thrust. But it did not come. "You will not die here," Cole said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You will live, and you will stand in a courtroom and you will tell the truth. Your words will be your punishment." They stormed the office. Draeger was gone. Having already fled down a deeper tunnel, the room was a mess of burning paper. But the main prize, the heavy, iron-bound master ledger, was only smoldering at the edges. Eliza beat out the flames with her hands, not even feeling the burns. They found the map, the original letters, everything. Just then, a deep, rumbling boom echoed from the depths of the mine, shaking the very foundations of the mountain. The first charge had gone off. "We have to go, now!" Bennett yelled. They half-dragged, half-carried their prisoner back through the secret tunnel as the mine began to tear itself apart behind them. A series of thunderous explosions rocked the earth, and the ground swelled as if taking a great breath. They burst out of the fissure into the clean desert air just as the entire face of the mountain where the main entrance had been slid downward in a colossal, deafening avalanche of rock and dust. They stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, their faces caked with grime and blue powder, watching the tomb of Silas Draeger's greed settle. They had the evidence. They had the witness. They mounted their tired horses, a small, battered company of survivors, and turned their faces toward the west, the long, dusty road to Tucson, and to a final reckoning. lay ahead. The federal courthouse in Tucson was a world away from the dusty, makeshift justice of Copper Bend. It was a formidable brick building, 2 stories high, with tall windows that seemed to look down on the dusty street with an air of stern authority. Inside, the courtroom was packed, the air thick with the smell of sweat, wool, and the dry, papery scent of the law. The sunlight that streamed through the windows was a brilliant, unforgiving white, bleaching the color from the room and leaving everything in stark relief. There was no room for shadows here. Eliza sat between Henry and Sheriff Pike, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Cole sat with Captain Bennett, his face impassive, his posture straight and still. He looked not like a man on trial, but like a mountain peak, weathered and unmovable. Silas Drager, though his name was the one on the docket, was not present. He had delivered his own verdict in a cloud of dust and dynamite. The trial was for his legacy, for the empire he had built on lies and blood. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man from back east, began by laying out the evidence with the cold, methodical precision of a watchmaker. He presented the scorched master ledger from the Black Crown mine, its pages a damning testament to a decade of criminal conspiracy. He displayed the forged letters, the fraudulent land claims, and the meticulously copied map of the Hart Ranch, with the spring marked not as a source of water, but as a strategic asset to be conquered. The jury, a panel of sober-faced merchants and ranchers, leaned forward, their expressions hardening with each new piece of the puzzle. The first witness to be called was Garrett, Drager's former foreman. He shuffled to the stand in chains, his face a sullen mask of defeat. "Mr. Garrett," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court who hired you for the attack on the Hart Red Hawk Ranch?" Garrett mumbled, his eyes on the floor. "Speak up, son," the judge commanded, his voice like gravel. "It was Drager," Garrett said, louder this time. "Silas Drager." "And what were your instructions?" "To burn them out, to make it look like the Apache did it. He said it was the best way. Scare them off. And if they fought back, the army would see it as an Indian uprising." "And how did he pay you?" Garrett looked up, a flicker of the old greed in his eyes. "Gold," he said. "He always paid in gold." Next, Sheriff Pike took the stand. He looked directly at the jury, his voice steady and clear. He admitted his own failings, his years of looking the other way, of compromising with a power he felt he could not fight. He told them of the federal warrant he had kept hidden, waiting for the moment when it would do the most good. "I was a coward for too long," Pike concluded, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought I was keeping a kind of peace, but all I was doing was letting the sickness spread. I am here today to try and make it right." Then the prosecutor called for Eliza Hart. She walked to the stand, her steps even, her gaze unwavering. She felt the eyes of the entire room on her, but she was not afraid. She was the daughter of a man who had died for the truth. "Miss Hart," the prosecutor said gently, "you have in your possession the journals of your late father. Is that correct?" "Yes," she replied. "Is there an entry you would like to share with the court?" Eliza opened the worn leather journal to a page she had marked. Her voice, when she began to read, was clear and strong, a bell ringing in the silent room. "September 12th, 1888. Another rancher has been burned out near the Salt River. The official report will blame the Apache, but I know this is a lie. There is a hunger in this land, a hunger for what lies beneath it. But the true wealth of this territory is not gold or silver. It is water. Water is the blood of the desert. Whoever holds the water holds the people by the throat." She closed the book softly. "My father wrote that 1 week before he and my mother were murdered in a raid that was also blamed on the Apache." A wave of murmurs went through the courtroom. Drager's defense attorney, a slick, well-dressed man named Barrows, rose to his feet for the cross-examination. He did not question Eliza. He knew better. Instead, he saved his venom for the next witness. "The prosecution calls Cole Red Hawk," the prosecutor announced. As Cole walked to the stand, Barrows smirked. "Your Honor, must we listen to the grunts of a savage who was, until recently, on the payroll of the very man whose name we are trying to clear?" "Objection," the prosecutor snapped. "Sustained," the judge said, glaring at Barrows. "Watch your tongue, Counselor." Cole took the oath, his hand steady on the Bible. Barrows began his attack immediately. "Tell the court, Red Hawk, is it not true that you were a scout for the United States Cavalry, an organization that has spent the last 20 years fighting your own people?" "I was a scout for the United States." "Yes," Cole answered, his English precise and measured. "So you are a traitor to your own kind, then a man who would sell out his brothers for a blue coat and a few dollars." "Objection," the prosecutor said, rising. "Counsel is badgering the witness." Cole held up a hand, a gesture of calm authority. "No," he said, looking directly at Barrows. "Let him speak." He then turned his gaze to the jury, and for the first time in a public forum, he let the walls of his silence fall away. "For most of my life," he began. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room, a low, resonant sound that commanded attention. "I have been two men. One man is Chiricahua Apache. He understands the voice of the wind and the language of the stones. The other man learned to read Shakespeare and to track for the army. The world you have built here has no room for a man to be both. So I was forced to choose, and for a long time, I chose silence, because your language, Mr. Barrows, the language of men like you and Silas Drager, is a language of lies. It is a language that calls greed progress and theft settlement." Barrows sputtered, his face turning red. "This is hardly—" Cole continued, his voice as steady as a drumbeat. "I worked for Silas Drager. This is true. I took his money because a man must live. I tracked men for him. I broke his horses. I did this with my eyes open. And it is a shame I will carry. I did not know the full depth of his crimes, but I knew he was a dishonest man. That is my mistake, and I own it here, before all of you." He then turned his body slightly to address the Apache and Mexican families who sat in the gallery, their dark eyes fixed on him. He spoke a few sentences in Apache, his voice softening, taking on the musical cadence she had first heard in the corral. A ripple of understanding went through that side of the room. Then he switched back to English. "I have told my brothers that this day is not about revenge. Revenge is a fire that burns the man who holds it. This day is about accountability. It is about a debt that is owed, not just for the lives that were taken, but for the lives that were poisoned by lies. The lie that one man is better than another because of the color of his skin. The lie that the law belongs only to the powerful. Mr. Drager is gone, but his poison remains. This verdict is the medicine. It is a bitter medicine, but it is the only way this land can begin to heal." He fell silent. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the motes of dust dancing in the sunbeams. Cole had not just testified. He had delivered a sermon. He had spoken a truth so profound and undeniable that it left no room for argument. Barrows sat down, his face pale, knowing he was beaten. The jury was out for less than an hour. When they returned, the foreman, a stern-looking rancher with a weathered face, did not look at the defense table. He looked at Cole, and then at Eliza. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder," he said, his voice ringing through the hall, "we find the estate of Silas Drager guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On all charges of crimes against the people of this territory, we find him guilty." A great, collective sigh of relief went through the room. Eliza felt tears welling in her eyes as she reached for Henry's hand. The judge banged his gavel. "It is the judgment of this court," he declared, "that the assets of the Black Crown Mine will be seized by the federal government. A significant portion of those assets will be used to establish a trust, a fund for reparations to the families, both Apache and settler, who were harmed by this conspiracy." He then looked down at Henry. "And on the matter of the charges against Henry Hart of Copper Bend, this court finds them to be without merit. All charges are hereby dismissed. You are a free man. Son." After the courtroom had cleared, Captain Bennett approached Cole. "That was a fine speech," she said, a small smile on her face. "You have a voice that people will listen to." She cleared her throat. "I have been authorized to create a new position, a civilian liaison between the Army and the local communities, to oversee the fair distribution of water rights and to help maintain the peace. It requires a man who speaks both languages, who understands both worlds, and who has the respect of both sides. It is a salaried, public position. The job is yours, if you want it." Cole looked at Eliza, a question in his eyes. She smiled, a real, radiant smile. It was a new beginning, not as a weapon in the shadows, but as a builder in the light. A few minutes later, Eliza and Cole walked out of the courthouse and into the brilliant, searing light of the Tucson afternoon. The heat rose from the street in shimmering waves. The sky above was a vast, unbroken sheet of white, like a fresh page, clean and unmarked, waiting for a new story to be written. The spring that followed the trial was a miracle of rebirth. The winter rains had been gentle and steady, and the desert, so long a canvas of brown and gray, erupted in a riot of color. Carpets of yellow poppies and purple lupine flowed over the hills, and the stark branches of the ocotillo cactus were tipped with fiery red blossoms. The land was healing. The Hart Red Hawk Ranch had become the heart of that healing. The scars of the fire were still visible on the side of the house, but they were no longer ugly wounds. Instead, they were reminders of a battle won. The air no longer smelled of ash, but of fresh-cut lumber, baking bread, and the sweet scent of desert sage. The ranch was no longer a fortress, but a crossroads. In the mornings, the main room of the house was transformed into a makeshift schoolhouse. Eliza stood before a chalkboard, a piece of chalk in her hand, teaching a dozen children. Half of them were the children of white ranchers. The other half were Apache children who rode in from the nearby reservation lands. She would write a word in English, horse, and then Cole, standing beside her, would write the Apache word below it. Geh! Laughter, once a rare sound on this land, now echoed through the house, a bilingual chorus of discovery. Eliza had also revived her father's newspaper. She had bought a small, used printing press with a portion of the reparation funds and set it up in the rebuilt barn. She called it the Territory Truth, just as he had. But her version was different. Beside the news of cattle prices and town council meetings, she printed traditional Apache stories, translated by Cole. She published articles written by Doña Marisol about the struggles of Mexican families seeking fair wages. She gave a voice to the voiceless, and the paper, once a small leaflet, was now read from Tucson to the territorial line. Cole had embraced his new role with the quiet dignity that defined him. He was no longer a shadow, but a bridge. He spent his days riding between the ranches, the Apache lands, and the army post, mediating disputes over water and grazing rights with a wisdom that both sides had come to respect. In the afternoons, he would train the young people, both Apache and white, including a now deeply humbled and focused Henry. He taught them not just how to ride and track, but how to see, how to listen to the land, and most importantly, how to know when to fight and when to wait. He often teased Henry about his posture in the saddle. "You ride like a soldier on parade," he would say with a rare grin. "A horse is not a flagpole. You must learn to bend with it, to feel its heart." Henry, for his part, had grown into a man. The rash boy who had nearly been hanged was gone, replaced by a quiet, capable rancher who was learning to speak Apache with a clumsy but earnest tongue. He managed the cattle with a skill that would have made his father proud. And he looked at Cole not with fear or resentment, but with the deep respect one reserves for a true teacher. In Copper Bend, Doña Marisol had used her share of the reparation funds to buy the old boarding house. She had turned it into a clean, safe haven, a place where native families could stay when they came into town, a refuge from the scornful eyes and closed doors they so often faced. And Sheriff Pike, his conscience finally clear, became a tireless advocate for the new laws. ensuring that the water rights and land titles were honored. His worn badge now a symbol of true, impartial justice. One afternoon, a year to the day of their first grim wedding in the silent church, Cole and Eliza stood under the great cottonwood tree by the creek. The whole community was there. Captain Bennett, Sheriff Pike, Doña Marisol, Henry, the vaqueros, and dozens of families, Apache, Mexican, and white, all standing together. Eliza wore a simple white dress, and in her hair was a crown of the same desert wildflowers she had held a year ago. But this time, they were not wilting. They were vibrant and alive. Cole stood beside her, wearing a beautifully beaded Apache vest over a clean linen shirt. There was no nervous minister this time. An old Apache elder, his face a beautiful map of wrinkles, began the ceremony with a blessing, his voice a low, chanting prayer to the four directions. He spoke of the earth, the sky, and the water that gives life to all. Then, Sheriff Pike, his hat held respectfully in his hands, read the simple, binding words from his law book. When it came time for the vows, Eliza turned to Cole, her eyes shining. In that silent church, she said, her voice soft but clear, "I said I do to save my brother's life. Today, I say it to save my own. My heart is yours. Cole Redhawk, it has been from the moment I saw you were a man of honor, not a man of silence." Cole took her hands in his. "In that church," he replied, his voice full of an emotion he no longer tried to hide, "I spoke a word in my own tongue to claim a piece of myself. Today, I speak to give all of myself to you. We will have children, and they will stand in both worlds. They will know the stories of Shakespeare and the songs of the Chiricahua. They will be strong, and they will be whole, because they will be born from a love that was not afraid." In the evening, as the sun set, casting long, golden shadows across the land, Cole sat on the porch steps, playing his wooden flute. It was not the lonely, haunting melody of a man in exile. It was a song of peace, of homecoming, a sound that spoke of a voice that had been found. Eliza sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, watching the first stars appear in the deepening twilight. The cool, clean water from their well, now shared freely with all their neighbors, gurgled in the creek nearby. Justice had not brought back her parents, but it had prevented countless other sorrows. It had allowed the desert to bloom. They were bound together by circumstance, but they chose to stay with their hearts, and that choice changed the course of the entire land. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love for you to comment where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And please subscribe to my channel Wild West Night, like the video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story in the video can be heard by more people.